Hey, this is Tom from MVP Chess. Welcome back to my series on Bobby Fischer's seminal work, My 60 Memorable Games. In this video, we'll be analyzing game number 4 that Fischer played in 1959 versus Pilnik in Mar del Plata. Before we jump in, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and be sure to check out my channel on Twitch at MVP_chess. All right, let's get started. So Fischer in this game with the black pieces, we have e4, c5, knight f3, d6, and after d4, Pilnik opts for the open Sicilian variation. Fischer captures, knight f6, knight c3, we have pawn to a6. Yeah! The Najdorf variation. If there's one opening other than the King's Indian Defense, of course, that is synonymous with Bobby Fischer, it is the Sicilian Najdorf. He was an absolute master playing this opening. So after bishop e2, Fischer plays the thematic Najdorf move. Now Kasparov liked to play more reserved with e6. Fischer played the classic Najdorf move, pawn to e5, striking back in the center and getting a foothold there. And now we can see the importance of this kind of peculiar pawn move on the side of the board, a6. Now this knight does not have access to the b5 square the way it does in some other Sicilian variations. So that's the key idea. Prevents knight b5 and drives the knight back to a rather passive square on b3. So both sides continue with development. Bishop e7, very natural. Castles, castles, bishop e3, and bishop e6. This is a really great square for the bishop in the Sicilian Najdorf. It's a really, as Daniel King calls it, a chunky bishop. And it's just really plugging some of these potentially weak light squares in black's position, namely the d5 square. Okay, that is the one downside of playing e5 in the Sicilian, including in the Najdorf, that you do weaken the d5 square. Okay, and white opts for pawn to f3. I call this f-pawn in the Sicilian, though. What the f do I do, pawn? The Sicilian is a tough nut to crack, and if white doesn't see counterplay of their own, black is just going to run away with the game. So very often, especially when we have same side castling positions, such as in this game, or even in bishop c4 variations, white chooses to push this f-pawn. But of course, this seriously weakens the king and can have huge ramifications later on in the game. So Fischer plays queen c7 here. He notes in the annotations that d5, which is a really thematic move that you want to be able to make in the Sicilian, especially in the Najdorf, because you're liquidating this backward pawn and getting a nice 4 versus 3 kingside pawn majority. But here, this break is a bit premature. Fischer points out that once we have these series of exchanges, after rook fd1, white has a little bit of an advantage. You notice that black is lagging behind in development a little bit here. The rooks aren't yet connected, and white is already contesting the open d file. So better here is queen c7, just finishing development. Queen e1, knight bd7. Okay, in the Sicilian, especially in the Najdorf, it's nice bringing this knight to d7 because it leaves this half-open c-file available for the queen and the rook to put pressure on white's position. This is the source of a lot of black's counterplay in the Sicilian, this half-open c-file. So we have rook d1, b5. Okay, gaining space on the queen side is always a good idea in these Najdorf positions. Maybe looking to kick this knight and long term launch some sort of minority attack against white's queenside structure, hopefully creating a weakness which black can later win. Rook d2. Okay, it appears as though Pilnik was looking in this position to perhaps create a battery on the d file and pressure the d pawn. Play seems a little bit slow to me. Knight b6, queen f2, and here Fischer played rook a b8. He figured that in this position, since Pilnik didn't capture the bishop on the previous move, that he would just take this opportunity to develop another piece. But he criticized this. He said better in this position would have been to activate this knight c4. So Pilnik sees this plan and then takes this opportunity to capture the knight. Rook b6, and then knight d5. Okay. So black always has to worry about this knight jump in the Najdorf, trying to abuse this weakened d5 square. But the nice thing about this super chunky bishop on e6 and this knight on f6 is black usually has this square well under control. So ideally, if white lands a piece on d5, black wants to exchange and leave a pawn in its wake. Okay, so we see after bishop d7, now going forward, this d5 square is not available to any of white's pieces. So that's kind of a classic example of how black looks to combat the weakness of this square. So good play by Fischer. And then Pilnik says, what the F do I do? Oh, I know. Let's push the what the F do I do pawn to F4. Again, just trying to see counterplay in the position at the cost of definitely weakening the king side. Fischer calmly plays bishop to f6. I was going to say that he considered pawn to f5, but he states in the annotations that he was really concerned about weakening his e6 square. So, for example, after c3, bishop f6, series of exchanges, and knight c5, you can see where this knight could potentially land on e6, and black might have to give up the light-squared bishop to take off that strong piece. So Fischer wanted to avoid that. He just played bishop to f6, bolstering this pawn, this strong point on e5. c3, Fischer takes a moment here to improve the coordination of his rooks. Right now they're split. This rook on b6 isn't really doing much, so he brings it back to the 8th rank. Now his rooks are nice and connected. And Pilnik captures on e5. Fischer played bishop takes e5 in this position. He did not like the look of, and the engine of course agrees with him, that after d takes e5, white was getting too much play after pawn to d6. He wanted to keep this pawn blockaded. That's why he opted for bishop takes e5. And look at this awesome bishop in the center of the board. You know, Hikaru, I guess, calls it the classic wooden shield. It's not classic because nobody else calls it that, but it is a great piece on the center of the board, controlling and influencing both the king side and the queen side. Really nice piece here. So we have knight d4. Pilnik looks to activate this kind of problem piece that white has in the open Sicilian, specifically in the Najdorf when it's driven back to b3. White always needs to look, how do I improve this piece, because it's rather passive all the way on the b3 square. Fischer plays a nice move here, pawn to g6. Okay, he's just taking the f5 square under control so that the knight can't get too active. And who knows, if need be, this bishop can come back to g7 in a fianchetto structure to protect the king side. And after a3, Fischer starts a really classic Najdorf operation. Pawn to a5. Great move. So if you play the Queen's Gambit declined exchange variation with either colors, white or black, you know about this plan, this minority attack plan. There we're talking about a Carlsbad structure, but here it's pretty similar, where white has these 4 pawns on the queen side. Black is using this pawn minority to try to break apart that pawn island and create a weakness, a long-term weakness that he can attack. So that's Fischer's general plan in this position. King h1 from Pilnik. Yeah, very often when you play the pawn, the f pawn to f3 or f4, eventually you have to make this move because you can have concrete problems on this diagonal. Okay, so here's a great example of how that move cost white. He has to burn a valuable temple, bringing the king to the corner, and now if we look ahead to some sort of endgame, there could be some back rank issues in white's position, and this king is further away from the center of the board. So Fischer continues with his plan, b4. Great move. Okay, now we have 2 points of contact, so Fischer's going to be able to create a weakness over on the queen side here that he can look to exploit. We have captures, and after rook c2, queen b6, we have knight c6. Okay, it looks like white just brought the knight to a nice outpost with a gain of time, but Fischer says, not so fast. I have this nice in-between move, bishop takes a3. Okay, with the point being that if white gets greedy, black can exchange on f2 and then push this pawn to a2, which now threatens to promote. If black comes back to defend, black has a couple good moves in this position, but simplest is just rook takes b8, gaining back the piece. And now white's got this monster pass pawn to worry about in combination with these two bishops, and this is a winning position for black. So nice heads up play by Fischer there. B takes a3, great in between move. So instead Pilnik captures on b6, which brings the rook to safety. Bishop takes a3, and then rook a8. Okay, here we go. This is not a dangerous outside passer. Okay, that's not what this is. It's important to understand that evaluation. This is a long-term serious weakness in white's camp, and Fischer's going to look to attack it and, if not win it outright, at least try to tie white's pieces down in its defense. And this immediately provokes Pilnik into a mistake. Maybe fair to call it an inaccuracy. After knight takes, okay, I think Pilnik was in a rush to take black's bishop pair off the board. I mean, this bishop does look very, very nice, controlling a lot of important squares on the queen side, you know, in combination with these rooks. But now Fischer has this really, really, really strong central pass pawn. Okay, so trade off the bishop, but, you know, I think it was an example of the cure being worse than the illness. This just creates a really favorable pawn structure for Fischer, which he'll be able to use. Rook c3. Okay, so Pilnik goes into passive defense of the a3 pawn, but Fischer trades one advantage for another. He says, okay, you want to keep your pawn nice and defended? You just ceded the second rank to me. Now look how active my rook is in this position. So great play. Rook c7 and bishop f5. Okay, it was important that Fischer saw this move ahead of time, okay, because there's two threats here. One to the bishop and also kind of an x-ray attack of this f7 pawn with the rooks. But Fischer has that under control. Pilnik tries to force matters, pawn to g4, but Fischer can move the bishop with gain of tempo. Bishop e4 check. Bishop f3. Now the f file is blocked. Okay, so Fischer actually has time here to just move the bishop to d3. There is no threat against the f7 pawn right now. Pilnik plays d6. I mean, that's his source of counterplay in the position, is this pass d pawn. You know, pass pawns are meant to be pushed, so Definitely seems like an appropriate course of action for white. Rook d8. Fischer controls the promotion square and also puts pressure on this pawn. And we have rook e1. Okay, Pilnik is willing to give up his passed d-pawn for Fischer's passed e-pawn. Rook takes d6. Rook takes e5, and then Fischer has a really nice move in this position, rook to f6, putting pressure on this bishop. But Pilnik defends, okay, with gain of time. This bishop is on prise now. So, over to you in this position. It's white to play. What did Fischer play? Pause your videos. Okay, Fischer really wanted to exploit the weaknesses that the f-pawn advance and then the later g4 pawn advance created in white's position. And one of the biggest weaknesses it created was a very weak long diagonal on the light squares towards the white's king. So congratulations if you found the exchange sacrifice, rook takes f3. Awesome move. And after rook takes, of course, the follow-up in this position, bishop e4. Now this rook is in a fatal pin on this weakened long diagonal. We have rook takes f7 defending. And now, when you have a piece pinned, of course, the most important thing to do is to apply pressure to the pinned piece. So I'll turn it back over to you to this critical moment in the game. How did Fischer put more pressure on this pinned piece? Pause your videos. Okay, if you said rook b3 in this position, ooh, sorry, you actually gave away the half point. This allows the white king to come up to g2 and hold the balance. This game would likely end in a draw. Correct in this position is rook f2. Okay, this is the correct way to apply pressure to this pinned piece because it prevents this king from coming up to the g2 square. We foreshadowed this, and this was ultimately Pilnik's downfall in this game, was having to stick this king in the corner. It was too far away from the action, and now it's one square too far away to either influence the f2 square or to somehow defend this rook. So it's not surprising that the pawn advance f3, a later f4, and g4 created fatal weaknesses in white's position that Fischer was able to exploit. Pilnik gives a little spite check here on f8, but after king g7, Pilnik resigned here. Of course, he can keep checking, but Fischer can just tuck his king away on h6 right here. Black will pick up this rook on f3 and have a completely winning endgame. Let's just take a look at how the game would conclude. We would have this ending where this bishop controls the promotion square of this passed a pawn. White will be able to win both of these pawns, promote either the h or g pawn, and win the game rather routinely. So great game from Fischer. Great first Najdorf game in the series. Of course, bishop e2 isn't the most critical test against the Najdorf. You could argue that bishop g5 is, and we'll see some more intense battles in the Najdorf later in the series. But for now, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on your notifications. You're not going to want to miss any of my future installments. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you next for game number 5. Take care.